even see them yet because I doubt this road will be finished. Then we can meet, yeah, and then we'll excuse me. Let's begin. Is that recorded?
Yo, cut it and push.
Cut it in post.
I'm gonna play it over and over.
Okay, so we've taken a short break and we're back to Leviticus. And hopefully we can remember the two misconceptions here. That it was a salvation manual for the Israelites, and that Leviticus is not relevant for Christians today. Both of these misconceptions are false. Right? And then we talked about three very important concepts to keep in mind. Leviticus is a do-over of the Garden of Eden in the Genesis narrative. Leviticus primarily deals with the forces of life and death. And third, Leviticus is deeply concerned with how the impurity, uncleanness, or sin of an individual can affect the presence of God within the community as a whole. So, we're going to be mainly referring to the second concept today. Leviticus primarily deals with the forces of life and death. And it's interesting how we're going to tie it together. And okay, I'm gonna do a little bit more of a recap because I feel like we're not going to understand unless we do a recap. Okay, you guys remember what holy means? Oh no, not clean. What? No one?
Not sinful.
No. Wow. It was really no matter pure. Oh no.
Oh,
Like
distinct.
Distinct, yes, distinct. Or like set apart.
Unique.
Right? Unique, yes. Thank you. Thank you for that. Right? So we need to be, or God wants his people to be holy as he is holy, and that he wants them to be distinct. He wants his people to be uniquely set apart for a specific purpose. Okay? That means their values, their beliefs, their perspectives, their lifestyle should be different. Then we also talked about the function and the importance of the sacrificial system and what did it do. It wasn't killing an animal so that it paid for your sin by dying, right? Remember we talked about how it was actually about the blood of the animal and how it purified the sin within the presence of the people, right? Yes, everyone remember? Good. And we also talked about the importance of rituals and rhythms of worship for God's people to have habits of worship together to invite his presence. And then before the break, we talked about the dangerous holy presence of God. Now today, we're going to talk about something that might seem boring, but I promise it is interesting and it is important and it is relevant. And it is going to be a little bit dense, so I'm sorry, Melody, but it'll make sense in the end, okay? If you fall asleep, I totally understand. Melody's very tired. She had a long night.
Me too.
And you, I will not. If you fall asleep, I will be tattling to your mother.
Tell me.
Okay. Then we're going to be reading from Leviticus 11. So, we're going to talk about the dietary laws, the dietary restrictions. Do you guys know anything about the dietary laws? For
Pork.
No pork. No pork.
Something about fish,
No shellfish. Yeah. So no like lobster or clams. No shrimp. The specific types of birds are known. Yeah. So anyway, the dietary laws. I'm just gonna put this out there. It's actually been the subject of debate and confusion since like even before Christianity. So like rabbis, like Jewish rabbis, have argued about what these laws mean for a really long time because they're really weird. Okay, it doesn't really make sense, and for a lot of people, like the dietary laws is where they just stop Bible reading plans because it's hard. It's hard. Your eyes glaze over as you're reading like. You shall not eat this animal, you shall not eat, like, it doesn't really matter to you, right? Like, we don't follow any of them, right? Unless you're an Orthodox Jew, I don't think we're really doing it, and also it's pretty self-explanatory, like, how do you get an application out of don't eat shellfish, right? Like, not a lot. So, it makes sense, like, at least with the ritual sacrifices and stuff, we can kind of pull a religious lesson out of it, but what do you do with chapter 11 where it talks about don't eat this animal and you can eat this animal but not this animal? Like, where's the religious foundation? Is this something cultural Or I don't know if you guys know this, but in Acts, Peter has this vision where God says, like, you can eat any animal. And so, like, that's why, like, a lot of the early Christians stopped following the dietary laws. So even there, it becomes, like, kind of confusing, like, why study this at all then? And these are legitimate questions, and that's also why, again, there's been so much debate and argument about what these passages actually mean. And today, I'm just going to provide you with one or two different interpretations. I'm drawing primarily from Jewish scholar Rabbi Jacob Milner. He wrote one of the most important and influential commentaries on Leviticus out there. But I also have some of my own interpretations from my own research. And I just wanted to talk about this. It's an incredibly confusing passage. And again, it's just one voice. You don't have to agree with me. You can read up on it yourself if you want. But hopefully it's still somewhat interesting and useful for your lives today. So let's just jump in. So one of the most popular explanations given for the dietary restrictions is that somehow these foods, they're like healthier for you, or like they're hygienic, like they're like cleaner animals, so you don't get like foodborne pathogens or whatever. But the problem with the health and hygiene view is that it doesn't really say that in the passage. Okay? So the primary reason that God gives them these dietary laws is actually in chapter 11, verses 44 to 45. Okay? Look what it says. For I am the Lord your God, sanctify yourselves therefore and be holy, for I am holy. You shall not defile yourselves with any swarming creature that moves on the earth. For I am the Lord who brought you up from the land of Egypt to be your God. You shall be holy, for I am holy. He repeats it twice. It's for the purposes of being holy, of being ritually clean, ritually pure, but also set apart, distinct, right? This is why, again, there are actually cleansing rituals for even the animals you're allowed to eat. So even if you're eating lamb or cow, right? Look what it says in verse 39 to 40. If an animal of which you may eat dies, anyone who touches its carcass shall be unclean until the evening. Those who eat of its carcass shall wash their clothes and be unclean until the evening. And those who carry the carcass shall wash their clothes and be unclean until the evening. So if this is a hygienic practice, then this verse makes no sense. Right? If it's just about hygiene and it's about clean animals, then why do you need to do ritual cleansing even after you eat an animal that you're allowed to eat? Right? And again, they're all going to die regardless. The animals are going to die regardless because you need to eat it. So that means you have to do cleansing no matter what. Any kind of animal, you have to do cleansing. So I think that's, again, where the hygienic or health practices just kind of fall apart. Right? Remember, God isn't saying you can't eat any of these animals. He's saying if you do eat them, then you need to cleanse yourself. Right? That's it. You just become ritually unclean. So you must do the ritual cleansing, and then you're good, right? Like if he doesn't say if you eat pork, I'm going to kill you, right? Or that if you eat shrimp, then the people of your community are going to stone you to death. He doesn't say that. It just makes you unclean. Okay? Yes? We good? Like this isn't like you can't touch bacon or you're going to die. That's not what they're saying. Okay? So if this is about health and hygiene, why is it that there's only a few animals that they're allowed to eat? There's like very few animals they're actually okay with, and all the other ones are ritually unclean. That seems very random and unnecessary, right? And again, I guess at this larger point that I'm trying to make here, I don't think that the dietary restrictions are about health and hygiene. I think primarily they serve two functions for the ancient Israelites. There's an ethical/communal purpose, and there's a relational purpose, and a holiness purpose. Okay? So again, holiness means holiness to be set apart or unique. Right? And there are only 4 times that the dietary restrictions are listed. There's once in Exodus, twice in Leviticus, and once in Deuteronomy. Right? And every single one of those times, it lists holiness as the primary reason for following these commands, for eating certain animals and not eating certain animals. Okay? So how were these food and animal laws supposed to make the Israelites holy? Well, again, I'm not sure, but here is one theory. This is a concept called the zones of holiness. Okay. You guys see how there's 3 rings here, right? Zones of holiness. So if you look at these 3 rings, then you can think of holiness as these 3 zones. Right? There's like the most holy zone, the Holy of Holies is in the middle, right? And then the second ring is like the second holy ring, and then the third ring is like the outer holy ring. Okay? And then anything outside of that is unholy. So this actually shows up multiple times all throughout the Old Testament. So for example, at Mount Sinai, right, that's where Moses meets God, right? Mount Sinai, only Moses could go into God's presence at the top of the mountain, right? The priests and the elders are allowed to come up halfway. At the bottom of the mountain, that's the outer ring, that's where the people are, with the altar of sacrifice. The tabernacle follows the same structure, right? Since it's a portable Mount Sinai. There's the tent, the Holy of Holies in the very middle, right? And then the outer court is where they have like the priests come in, and then the outer court is where the Gentiles and believers can come in, right? Even offerings are split into these three holiness zones, okay? Sacrificial animals. So I don't know if you guys know this, but when you cut open an animal, there's like a lot of this internal fat. It's called sweat. Not S-W-E-A-T, but S-U-E-T, sweat, right? Sweat is like the richest and most like thick fat in the middle, like basically it's between all the organs. It like helps protect the inside of your body. That fat is supposed to be burned on the altar. It's the most holy part of the animal. And then the second ring, right, is again, it's like the second holy part, right? The priests, they eat the parts where it's in that second ring, right? Which is like, so some of the organs are for the priest, other organs are burned up on the altar, right? So some of the organs and the sweat is all burned up on the altar, and some of the organs are for the priest. In fact, in 1 Samuel 2, I don't know if you guys know this, but do you guys know Eli? He's the priest that adopted Samuel, okay, in 1 Samuel. No? Okay, so he had two sons that were like evil, but then they were also serving as priests, and they ended up dying. They ended up being killed by the enemy because they actually eat the fat that was meant for the altar of God. Okay, and then the people are allowed to eat like the head and the legs, and the other meat that's outside of the third. Right? So if you look at all of humanity, then that also applies to all of humanity. God is at the center, He's the most holy, and then the Israelites are kind of the representative to the rest of humanity. That's the second ring, and then all the other general population of humanity belongs in the third ring. And so these dietary restrictions are what allow the Israelites to be part of that second ring, right? To show that there is a distinction between them and the people of the world. So they're being bound to this different code of ethics in order to show, right, even through their interactions with their animals and their food, that they are the chosen people of God. Why? I don't know. Again, that is the source of debate. Why? Why some animals and why not other animals? No one knows. There's no explanation for this. There's no clear reading of scripture that can tell us. And no one lived back then, right? Like, they're all dead, so we don't really know. All of the scholarship is just speculation, right? But I believe that there are theories that we can come to, right? So Rabbi Jacob Milgram, for example, he makes a pretty compelling case that he says the food laws were there to show that they were ethically different from their neighbors. Okay? Again, ethics is a fancy way of just saying beliefs or ideas that motivate your behaviors. Rabbi Milgram believes that there's kind of this underlying system of values that they were utilizing in order to keep from eating these animals. Right? And so this part gets a little intense, but sit with me here. Okay. The ancient Israelites, and a lot of rabbis actually do support this theory, that they actually assumed that the first humans were vegetarians. And we see this in Genesis chapter 1, verse 29 through 30. God said, "See, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. Right? And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has a breath of life, I have given every green plant for food." You guys notice? It doesn't say that the animals are for food. Right? He gives the animals their own food, and he gives humans their food, and they're both plants. So a lot of ancient Israelites believe that the first humans were vegetarian. However, due to their rebellion, they end up acquiring a desire to not just rule over creation, but to consume it, to devour creation for themselves. And they believe that this craving for meat comes from the human desire for power. Right? And then you kind of see that when God blesses Noah after the flood in Genesis 9. In Genesis chapter 9, verse 2 to 3. The fear and dread of you shall rest on every animal of the earth and on every bird of the air, on everything that creeps on the ground and all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. And just as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. Right? Interesting, right? But in order to control that desire for power, God adds an important rule in verses 4 and 5. Right? What is this rule? What is this caveat? He says, you shall not eat the blood of the animal. Why? Okay, look at this, chapter 9, verses 4 to 5. Only you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. For your own lifeblood I will surely require a reckoning. From every animal I will require it, and from human beings, each one for the blood of another. I will require a reckoning for human life. This is very interesting. Why? Because in God's system, animals have their own blood, and that means that animals are also responsible under God's law. Right? In Exodus chapter 20, verse 28, God says that all animals that kill another human being must be put to death without exception, and they cannot be eaten and they cannot be sold as meat. Right? It must be murdered and then disposed of. Right? If a human being has sex with an animal, that's death for the human and the animal in Leviticus 20:15. Right? Literally, Israelite animals were also commanded to keep the Sabbath. The animals could not work on the Sabbath too, along with their owners. That's in Exodus chapter 20, verse 10, and Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 14. Right? Again, this is consistent with what we learned in Jonah. Because remember, the animals had to fast along with all the people. Right? God cares about all of his creation, including his animals. Not only that, God gives specific instruction for killing and slaughtering animals too. Okay? Look at what it says in Deuteronomy chapter 12. If the place where the Lord your God will choose to put his name is too far from you, and you slaughter as I have commanded you, any of your herd or flock that the Lord has given you, then you may eat within your towns whenever you desire. Right? So he doesn't give us the specific instructions here, right? But there's an indication. There is a specific way that they're supposed to even kill their animals, butcher their animals. Okay? Again, this is why God never allows blood to be burned on the altar. Okay? The God of Israel is against life sacrifices, and blood must be returned to the ground, where God brought forth life from the beginning. From thus we came, and to thus we shall return. And so I think that this is a big reason why Israel is limited to eating only a few animals in the animal kingdom. But what does that have to do with us today? Who cares? Why should we care about the dietary laws? Why should we care if we love bacon and shrimp, right? And I think our application today boils down into 2 points. First, the dietary laws show us that all life is precious to God, right? They belong to God and God alone. Is that Minecraft? Are you insinuating I am God when I play Minecraft? That's a square. Anyway, the dietary laws are supposed to remind the Israelites on a day-to-day basis that they're supposed to have a reverence for life. Right? God commanded them to eat only a few of the many animals available to eat. And again, he's going to command a very specific way that they need to be slaughtered. Right? Only the people who are butchers are supposed to kill animals for food and prepare them. Right? That is a law from God in Leviticus. And the Israelites, they're reminded time and time again, do not eat the lifeblood of the animals. Again, this action is supposed to show that eating meat is a concession that God grants us. Right? Not the right that we may take for granted. Bringing death to living things is not something that we should take lightly. Right? It's very much against the practices of the cultures around them. This blood prohibition is unique to ancient Israel. No one else does this in ancient cultures. Most other cultures in the area, they either consume blood regularly or only save the blood for sacrificial purposes. Right? Only Israel prohibits the consumption of blood from all the creatures that they consume. Why? Well, blood's pretty nutritious. Right? It makes sense for ancient peoples to consume it. But Israel believed that humanity did not have the right to slaughter any animals unless granted divine permission from God. This is how Rabbi Newman puts it in his commentary. The abstention from blood is a constant reminder to humans that though they may satisfy their appetite for food, they must curb their hunger for power. Because life is inviolable, it may not be tampered with indiscriminately. Okay. So beautifully put. The holiness of this practice is a reminder that God is the author of all life, and therefore all life must be returned back to Him. This is a way that they practice holiness, how they set themselves apart. Right? And I'm not saying we need to all become vegetarian today, right? but like there is a very special, I think, mindfulness that you have for food and for life when you practice vegetarianism or veganism. Right? Secondly, the dietary law shows that holiness is less about following rules perfectly, much more about living a life of self-reflection and increasing awareness of God's presence and character in our lives. So again, I think this is largely missing in the lives of most American Christians, right? We have this idea that there's religious life that happens on Sundays and a secular life that happens outside the church. We don't really bring our faith, we don't bring our practices of faith outside, right? And I'm not saying that we need to be perfect here. Again, I don't think any group practices this perfectly, right? Even for the Israelites, they still forgot in the end. But that's a great holiness, right? It's something you practice on a day-to-day basis, every moment of your day, right? And we're not going to be perfect, but it still means we should try. We should continue to pursue it. Success is not the goal. Faithfulness is the goal, right? Because again, Jesus succeeded, so that's not what we're chasing, right? The goal is not perfection. It is effort. It is faithfulness. It is obedience, right? Israel's sin was not that they didn't keep the laws perfectly, it's that they forgot the reason behind why they kept them. Okay? They forgot the God, the nature and character of the God who commanded those laws to be followed. Right? This is why Jesus had to come. He fulfilled the law. He's the one that embodied the law perfectly, so that we can be reminded of God's character, of his heart. Right? So therefore our goal as human beings is not to be perfect, it's to be faithful to our call as disciples of Jesus Christ. Right? We also have a responsibility to live our lives the way that Israel was commanded to live, the way that Jesus himself showed us how to live, with practices, with rituals, with rhythms of life that remind us, that constantly point us back to the character and nature of God. And this is why Americans get stuck. Why? Because we don't have rituals, we don't have practices for remembering God. The ones that we do have really suck. Prayer, Bible reading, and coming to church. And fasting every once in a while. But like, those are things you do at church. It's not really like that helpful to remind us, right? And I'm not saying that these are bad practices. I'm just saying that they are really lacking, right? Compared to the Israelites who have this entire system of holiness, who have to follow specific dietary restrictions, right? Imagine like having to remember these laws every time you go eat, right? And I think like, and again, the Israelites also had these same practices. They also prayed. They also met weekly, right, on a regular basis. They also heard the word of God, right? But again, they had more than that. But we don't. Like, that's all we got, right? So the Israelites have this entire system where their whole lives are intended to express holiness, but not us, right? We don't have daily practices that remind us of who God is, of what it is to follow him, right? And yeah, you got your morning Bible app or whatever, or read it on the way to work or school, sure, that's fine, right? Oh, you pray before you eat your meal? Okay, that's fine, you can keep those things, right? I'm not saying that that is bad, I'm saying if that's it, right, then we are basically carving out a really small portion of our day to think about God, to reflect on ourselves, to reflect on God's character, right? To be aware of his presence in our lives. And I want you to implement more, right? Let's throw in some more in there. If you don't have any, try to think of one, right? Or two. They don't have to be huge. They don't have to be super intense or holy. They just have to be good reminders that God is at work in your life, that you are a follower of Jesus. Right? Again, holiness is not about perfection. Right? Holiness is about faithfulness and obedience. For example, I don't have a specific prayer time for my daughter. Okay? A lot of pastors told me that I should have it and that they have it for their kids. I don't want to do that. I think it's boring. Right? I don't have a specific prayer time for my daughter. Right? I can barely get her to sit down for meals. I don't even know how I'm going to get her to do that. But I do have a liturgy. Okay? I have a planned prayer that I read, that I pray to her, that I pray to God for her every night as part of our bedtime routine. Right? It's not very long. It's like 15 to 30 seconds, but it's really precious to me, that prayer, right? It's a really good reminder to me of what should truly matter in my life as I raise my daughter. What I should be thinking of when I raise my daughter. If you want to hear it, I can tell it to you after service, but yeah. I don't know if you guys know this, but a lot of Jews, they still follow these dietary restrictions, right? Today. Many Jews are atheists. Like, a lot of of Jewish people do not believe in God, but they still follow the dietary restrictions. Isn't that interesting? It's because for them to belong to their community, that is how worth it is to them. They do that as a symbol of solidarity, to say, I stand with the rest of my community, even if they don't necessarily believe in a God, right, or a divine being. They still follow these procedures because it's part of their way of saying, I am a part of this community. Right? And there's a lot of evidence to suggest, right, that this is probably how the early church operated. If you look at Acts, it doesn't give you a list of things that the early church needed to believe. There is no Apostles' Creed in Acts, right? You know what it does have in Acts? It has a list of behaviors that they all engaged in. And anyone who did not engage in those behaviors was not a part of the community. Were not allowed to join in the community. So I think that it is important for us to have these rituals, to have these rules, to have these types of ways to remind us, right, of God's holiness, that we are different, that we should be set apart, right? For example, another rule that I hold is when someone who is homeless approaches me and asks for money, right, I made it a habit to just say yes. Or more specifically, I offer to buy them food, right? Why? Because I think that if I'm second guessing myself, or if I sit there trying to think about whether or not I should, I probably won't. But by training myself to have a habit of when they come and approach me to say, I can buy you some food, it helps me. It helps to remind me of God's generosity to me, of God's compassion for all people, right? It's a practice of generosity that I'm trying to implement, to discipline myself to do, right? So today, that's what I want you guys to do. Think about it. What are some rituals and practices that you can implement in your life? What are some practices of gratitude, of generosity, of compassion, of forgiveness, of mercy, of justice, of love that you can establish in your daily lives? Little reminders, little rituals that draw you closer to the heart and character of God. Okay? And it doesn't have to be like prayer or Bible reading. Okay? Think of other ones. Be creative. The ancient Israelites have these like food and animal laws, right? I don't know. Get a post-it note or an alarm, right? Or meet with someone, or like, I don't know, right? Have a monthly time to serve somewhere, meditate. I don't know, do something specific when you're exercising. I have no idea. Whatever the case is, I really hope and pray that we can push each other toward holiness. Amen? Let's do that. Let's pray together.